I can't believe what the states are about to do. And you're not either. I'm your host, Steven Van Metre, and thanks for joining me today. And with inflation rising and state budgets looking fat, some governors are looking to stoke the fires of inflation. Let's head over to this headline where we see gasoline prices are hitting $6 in some parts of the country, and summer driving season isn't here yet, suggesting the prices are going even higher. And some states have rolled back gas taxes. Connecticut, Maryland, Georgia, and others are looking at this. In fact, even the federal government's getting in on the gig as Senate Democrats and members of the House are looking to temporarily lift the 18.4 cent per gallon federal gas tax. And only you can imagine what this is going to mean. But it's going to get even worse because some states, well, they've got too much money and they don't know what to do with it. And consumers are reeling right now, as we can see, under inflation. This survey going back to January, where if it was taken today, it'd be even worse. You can see annual households are earning less than $40,000 a year. 66% of them are seeing somewhere between moderate and severe hardships, mainly due to inflation. And those between $40,000 and $100,000 a year, well, more than half of them are under some form of hardship. And it makes sense because we know that real personal disposable income, or inflation adjusted disposable personal income, is at a negative 10% year over year rate of change. And this is historically unprecedented, meaning people have a lot less money than they did a year ago. And we also know that despite wages rising, inflation's been rising faster than that. And so when we look at inflation adjusted average hourly earnings, well, we're in recession territory, something we haven't seen since the great financial crisis. And the states, well, they're looking to help you out, as roughly a dozen of them are proposing sending a one-time tax rebate check to their residents to offset higher inflation in 4 decades, with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle pointing to high gas and food prices as prompting their actions. But will such things actually work? With consumers already upset about all the stimulus that has led to inflation, can you only imagine what's going to happen next? And it's going to get worse. Because we can see here, total state revenue in 2022 between April 21 and January 2022, when adjusted for inflation, increased more than 19% compared to the same period earlier. So states have massive surpluses and they just seemingly don't know what to do with them. And what better way to do is help their constituents by sending them a check. And this one-time checks that are being proposed will put money back into consumers' wallets, but some other states are considering or already planning to cut income taxes, providing an ongoing tax break for residents. And you already know what's going to happen. Some of these states are going to do this, and it's going to drive prices up even higher, because when these checks start going out, what are other retailers and businesses going to do? They're going to raise their prices because these checks or these debit cards, as California is proposing, do not have to be used at a gas station. They can be used on anything, and that means when the governments are doling out money, prices are going to go up. And all of a sudden, consumers, after they spend that money, are going to have the same thing that's happening right now, is higher prices that are sticky and, of course, less money to afford it. But will we see actually gas prices come back down? Well, let's revisit something we talked about yesterday, because I want to show you why gas prices are likely to come down and why these states are making the wrong move at the wrong time. Let's go back to the Cushing inventory data, and we looked at this yesterday, and what do we see? And just to refresh your memory, we saw back in 2014, inventories around the summer to fall were at very low levels. We saw this again around fall 2018. And we see this again happening now. And as I pointed out the other day, when we see these matching peaks in WTI, or West Texas Intermediate crude oil, which is at Cushing, Oklahoma, when you see those inventory levels bottom out, well, that means prices are coming down. And it's important to understand that when you have a barrel of West Texas Intermediate, you've got it, refine it, you've got a barrel of gasoline. So what do you think is going to happen when we pull up this chart of gasoline? Well, check this out. The same thing happens. Here we are in the summer of 2014, where Cushing inventories were bottoming out, and look what happened. Gas prices came down. How about the summer to fall 2018? Cushing inventories were bottoming out. Gas prices went down. And where we're at now, Cushing inventories bottoming and potentially now heading low or heading higher, which means oil prices should start to head down and gas prices should too. So all the states are going to do is exacerbate the issue we have now and put people in a worse situation. There'll be a brief euphoria of getting these checks and being able to afford things, but once those checks dry up, we'll be back where we're at now. And even worse, you'll know what's going to happen in a couple of years, because some of you have been around a while like I have, and you know what this means when the states have too much money and they don't know what to do, so they start doling it out. In a few years, what happens? That's right, you got it. They don't have enough money, and all of a sudden, they need to raise our taxes. And of course, we already know we're likely to head into a recession, and with that, the states will have less money and will be forced to raise taxes. But if there's one thing that shouldn't be headed into a recession, that's your portfolio. Be sure to check out Portfolio. I'll put a link up there in the corner in the description below. If you haven't taken a look at it, maybe now's a good time. Now let's go on with the story, because I want to show you that all these states that are going to do this are making the wrong move at the wrong time. Now, what we saw yesterday's headline with the U.S. jobless claims fell to 187,000, lowest since 1969. And this decline in initial claim for jobless benefits reflects a tight labor market. Now, if you're a policymaker, a tight labor market means that wages are going to keep going up because there aren't enough workers for all the jobs. And what do policymakers perceive that to be? Well, when you get a raise, it's inflationary. When they get a raise, it's a good thing. So you have to understand now, they're worried that you getting raises means inflation is going to go up, and then they're going to line some people's pockets, depending on what state you live in, with some more money to drive prices up even more. But is this the wrong move as well? Well, check this out. Just as a reflection of how tight labor markets are, in an environment where employers are struggling to hire and retain workers, layoffs are going to be at a minimum. But are they? Well, let's challenge that, because, I think they're wrong. So let's go here where we've got the 4-week moving average initial claims. And I've cut off the recent data from the pandemic because it skews the chart and there's no way to adjust for it. And we're going to overlay the consumer price index on a year-over-year rate of change. And look at this. Let's go back in time, because I want to show you how and where this changed. You'll notice back in the 1970s, consumer prices rose and then unemployment rose. And here you see in the early 70s again, consumer prices rise, unemployment rise. And you start to get an idea. You see here again in the kind of the late 70s. What is that telling you? Is that consumers just couldn't afford those higher prices. But you'll notice in the graph, the high prices stuck. And that's what people are afraid of today. They're afraid that all this inflation isn't going to go away. But for some reason, it has. So in the past, so let's take a look and see where this goes. Now, you'll notice as we get down now into the late 80s, early 90s, we see the consumer price index rising some and initial claims rising. So they're still maintaining that relationship. But you notice now the change that happened isn't that consumer prices rose first. Now we see, in fact, initial claims rising. And then we start to see this weird thing about inflation fall off. And we really don't start to get this dynamic into full force until the dot-com bubble, where you see the 4-week moving average initial claims rise and consumer prices go down. So what's happening is, as consumer prices get too high, consumer wages aren't keeping up with it. And ultimately, when you don't have enough wage growth, then retailers, wholesalers, inventory starts backing up, sales fall off, and then all of a sudden you've got unemployment. And that's the dynamic we're seeing now. And you can see that again here in the great financial crisis. Initial claims are rising as inflation. As you see inflation here, red, starts to get too hot. Initial claims start to move higher. Inflation briefly dips, comes back up, and then comes crashing down, because we're in a new dynamic now, my friends, where when you see consumer prices rise, in the past, it led to unemployment. Now, what we're seeing is when consumer prices rise, it doesn't trigger more unemployment, but it also then shoves prices down as demand falls. In the past, those prices didn't give up. So if we look at now, and this isn't exactly indicative of where we're at because I didn't pull across, but you'll notice that initial claims are very low, and now the lowest level since 1969, inflation being relatively high. It's up here now at the 7 level. We'll make just a mark with my mouse. And so what that tells you is all these states, and potentially the federal government, who's looking at either lowering taxes or sending out one-time checks, they're doing it at the wrong time. All they're going to end up doing is pushing inflation up. And as we've seen, that will lead to higher unemployment, and then all of a sudden a crash in consumer prices. So as I started out the show today is, I can't believe the states are going to do this. Well, but they probably are. And I'm your host, Steven Van Metre again. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being fans. Bye now.